We're back.
What up?
Man, it's been a while. What did you do during that break?
Oh, I took a nap. I went to go see a movie. I played video games, went out on a hot date, the classic stuff.
Nice. I watched all 3 hours of The Batman.
Ooh, nice. What'd you think?
It was way too long.
It is way too long.
I actually have. I've still only seen half of that movie.
I did watch it, and it's very good, but you're right. It's at least half an hour too long.
I think I liked what I saw, but it was half a movie, and I haven't seen the rest of it. So, yeah, I don't know. And now I'm watching all this alien stuff.
We certainly are.
Are you ready to jump into the Prometheus Deleted and extended scenes?
I think I'm good. I think I'm good to go.
There's 40 million of these things. Some of them I think we're just going to brush over, but I've got them arranged in the order they were presented in the digital release.
Just for the record, there's 14 of them.
So that's what I said, 40 million.
Correct. Also, again, since I have the physical copy of this, did your version of it come with the audio commentaries?
It did, but I did not watch them with the audio commentary.
I did. So
Okay.
As we go, if the commentary notes anything important or useful or, just fun to mention, I'll point them out as we go.
Absolutely. It's almost like we planned this, but we didn't. Just
We actually did.
serendipitous that you watched them with commentary and I didn't.
And as a matter of fact, I was actually going to go through and watch the actual movie with the commentary on, so I could also toss a couple other little factoids out, but I just didn't have time to do that. So.
That's fine. I mean,
yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, maybe.
So anyway,
that'll be a Patreon bonus.
There we go.
So let's just start with the first deleted scene. I think they're pretty much arranged in chronological order. Then it was the arrival of the engineers, which is just sort of an alternate opening to the film where instead of just seeing the one engineer drink the soup, there are several engineers all kind of seeing him off, I suppose. My initial reaction was this must mean that several of them are going to do this sacrifice at different places, maybe to kind of ensure that everything takes root. But we still only see the one. And
in case anyone who's listening is wondering, the fact that there's several engineers also in this scene is the only meaningful difference in this scene.
It is. I couldn't tell. I thought maybe the scene of him breaking down might have been a little bit extended, where we see like some of the black particles like blowing off into the sky and stuff like that. But I didn't do a direct side-by-side comparison. It's essentially the same scene, except there's 5 or 6 other engineers.
I actually paused it to count, and I saw at least 9, possibly 10, because there was one that was like, one of the ones in the foreground was mostly covering it up. So I couldn't tell if it was a rock or part of that hooded cloak they were wearing. So there was either 9 or 10.
There's either 9 engineers and a rock or 10 engineers. Okay.
Correct. But yeah, otherwise, that's basically the only meaningful difference. Like when they say it's an alternate opening, it technically is, but like, come on.
Yeah. Did the commentary say anything interesting about why the other engineers were there, or was it just, we wanted to put more engineers in?
Well, as far as why they were there, he didn't really go into that because, the scene was still only like a minute and a half long or whatever.
Right.
Because like, how I said for the Wayland files, it was like when you opened up that menu, there was that other little secondary box off to the side that had like additional information when the cursor was on a video, but before you played it.
Yes.
Well, the menu for the deleted and alternate scenes had a similar thing. It was a little box that would give you a little blurb about the information before you hit play to just like tell you what was going on in the scene.
Sure.
And there is one interesting piece of information that was in that little menu.
Okay.
That menu explicitly confirms that scene takes place on prehistoric Earth.
Okay. Well, there it is. Prehistoric Earth. So that was definitely Earth. At least, I mean, something they can retcon for sure, but as far as we know, that's about as official as it gets.
They don't say in the movie it was Earth, but when they made that scene, it was intended by them to be Earth.
To be Earth. Got it.
I will say, however, just for the record, for anyone listening, like I said, there's 14 scenes here. 13 of them, the commentary is done by the editor, who's a man by the name of Pietro Scalia. Okay. And one of them later on is done by the VFX supervisor, Richard Stammers.
Okay.
But that he's only on one of them. The other 13 were done by the editor.
Gotcha.
And the one interesting thing of note that I commented here is that in the original version of the scene, like when all the engineers were there, they talked.
Oh, fascinating.
And like actually various scenes throughout the movie with all of the engineers in them, like, you know, whenever an engineer would show up, a lot of them had dialogue, but early on in the editing process, they cut out all of the dialogue for all of the engineers throughout the entire movie.
That's frustrating.
And well, he said, like, according to him, they did it on purpose because it's like they recognized that since the engineers already looked so humanoid, every other way other than their appearance, they were trying to go out of their way and make the engineers seem as least or as less, or how would I phrase that? As little humanoid as possible, despite their appearance. And one of the ways they did that was cut out so that you never hear them talk, so it would make them seem more weird and mysterious.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel. Well, we'll get to that because there's an extended scene where there's a lot of talking, and we'll get to that later.
But like the reason I bring that up though is because the only other thing that the commentary notes for this scene that I thought was particularly interesting is that when the engineer talks, the language they spoke, the like sound engineers, the editors, Ridley Scott and all them, the language they speak was based off of the real life language of Sanskrit.
Oh, interesting.
They're not speaking a form of Sanskrit, but they like took Sanskrit and then like changed it and modified it in these various ways and then used that as the engineer.
Which we see David kind of, you know, studying all of these proto languages and figuring out how to communicate with them. So having, you know, that just reinforces the idea that human language developed from the engineers in the first place. I don't know. The scene was fine.
Yeah, it was fine. It was just, you know, like I said, they said it was an alternate opening, but it wasn't. It was only alternate in like the technical sense. Like it's the same thing, whatever.
Sure.
You know?
Next scene we got was it's called "'Tis the Season." It's just sort of a slightly extended version of Captain Janek setting up his Christmas tree and the conversation he has with Vickers about how we need the holidays to, you know, keep the time, you know what time it is. Keep time moving.
Yeah, show that time is still passing for us.
Yeah, the only interesting thing here is when she tells him, you know, in the movie, she tells him briefing in 5 minutes, and he's like, well, I haven't had my breakfast yet. And then I think it cuts in the movie. And in this, she follows up with like, well, don't you want to know what we're doing out here? And he says, no, I really don't. And isn't that why you hired me in the first place? Just kind of reinforcing the idea that they hired a bunch of people without telling them what was going on. And Janek is like, I'm pretty sure that's how I got my job, because I don't ask questions, right?
And then he takes the miniature little Christmas tree and puts it in the middle of one of the mess hall tables. Yeah. And everyone's kind of like, ugh.
It's got, well, it's his flight crew that he takes it over to. So I think, again, showing that the entire flight crew they're like, look, we're minding our own business. We're staying out of this. We're not a part of the science crew. We're the flight crew. We don't need to know what's going on. We just got to fly the ship, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Next scene is this is when they've already entered the engineer structure. This must be after they have, you know, broken one of those vials. I don't exactly know what this falls in. No, it has to be before that, right? Because Milburn and Fifield were there.
Yeah, as far as I know, I believe everyone is still alive. This is before Milburn and Fifield ran off. This is when everyone, including David, the entire team, when they went down there for the first time.
And basically, it's Milburn, the biologist, the guy who with the hood keeps putting the hood up over his head, the one who gets left behind with Fifield, discovers basically a giant worm, right? Not giant like the ones we see later that crawl inside his suit, but like a pretty decent sized, worm-like organism. And he's like super duper psyched as a biologist. He's like, this is the first like proof of life on this planet, huge discovery. He captures it in a specimen jar. And David says something along the lines of our first alien, Yeah,
in my notes, it's specifically referred to as, quote, a lil wormy guy.
I like this scene, and I think that this scene should have been in the final cut, personally. Not only because...
I actually really liked it, too. Yeah, I thought it was cool.
Like, first, it makes the discoveries of the alien... Like, it gives you a little bit of hope, right? They're like, oh my God, they found something. They found proof of life, etc. That's a win for the expedition. It also shows us what Milburn is kind of there for, because I know he says he's a biologist, but then... he doesn't do anything in the movie.
Yeah, we never see him biologize anything, exactly.
We see him act really reckless with another organism he encounters later, and that seemed very strange and out of character, but if you take this scene into consideration where he's already interacted with one that looks very similar to the one he will find later, and his excitement about it, like it kind of, he's might sort of be like, oh, it's another one. I just found one of you. Come here, little guy, because he's doing the same kind of like, come here, little baby kind of stuff to it,
Yeah.
So it makes that other scene feel a little bit more believable, even if it's still incredibly stupid.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I really liked the scene too. I thought it was fun, and it was one of those things where it's like it's only like a minute long. I don't want to say they don't have a reason to cut it, because obviously they did, or else they wouldn't have cut it. Right. But it's one of the handful of scenes in this list that like I probably would have liked to see in the movie. But the commentary for this does point out why they cut it. And it's funny because it's something where after they said that, I was like, oh, yeah, good point. But it never even occurred to me at the time. He actually said that like this is one of those classic like kill your darling scenes. He straight up said it was one of his favorite scenes in the movie. Yeah. And he really, really hated cutting it. He said that it was in there to both hint at the type of creatures they're going to see later on in the movie.
Sure.
And to show how the group dynamics operate when the entire crew is together in the same place.
Yeah.
But the reason they cut it is because this thing happens, and then at no point ever, at any point in the rest of the movie, do they ever follow up with that thing, and we never see it again, and we never find out what it was or where it came from or why it was there at all. Yeah. So they just cut it because they realized that people watching this movie would see it as like a loose plot thread that was never followed up on.
What happened to the specimen, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that could have been explained away if it had been on Milburn's person, and they get, they ran into all kinds of trouble when they had to stay overnight during the storm in that facility. If he had the specimen in his possession, it would have just made sense that it got left behind,
Yeah.
But I see where the editor's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's like, it still would have made sense to me to keep it, but it's like, I'm not the one getting paid by Ridley Scott to edit this movie.
Right.
He knows what he's doing more than I do. So if that's what he says, I'm like, fine. That being said, like I already mentioned, I did like the scene and I thought it was cool.
Yeah. And that scene's followed up immediately with a scene from later in the movie when Milburn and Fifield are trapped inside the structure during the storm, where they find a molted skin, right, from something. They just find this thing.
Like how a skin will, or like how a snake will shed its skin. They find a big skin.
It's a nice reference to Alien, where they find the molted alien skin in the vents when the thing is growing. This must have been the skin that was growing off of the, I forget the term for it, but the little cobra mutant thing. That
Hammerpede.
The Hammerpede, yeah. It must have been that, right, from that thing's evolution. But it was in a different location. It wasn't in the jar room, I don't think.
It was not. It was just in a hallway.
Yeah, it was a nice little allusion to, I mean, you could interpret it any number of ways. Like it could have been like, whoa, is this like a xenomorph skin or something? Or is it just the skin of something else molting and growing? Take it or leave it. It was fun to see. It feels kind of like an Easter egg to me personally.
And that's kind of the same reason they cut it. The editor said in the commentary that, like in the previous scene, this got cut because like whatever the thing or wherever that skin came from never got followed up on. It was never explained explicitly anywhere in the movie. Right. You know, it never really goes anywhere, and it's not really connected explicitly to anything else that happened. So they figured it would be seen as too much of like a loose thread, or not necessarily a plot hole, but just like something that comes out of nowhere for seemingly no narratively important reason.
Sure.
So like with the previous scene, that's why they cut it.
But things like that, I guess they just don't bother me as much as maybe they would for other people. Like not having an answer to whose skin that is not going to make me not enjoy the movie. It's going to make me think like that's more of the way like an unanswered question I think should play out for me. It's like, oh, it's introducing this idea that there is other life here that we aren't seeing and aren't going to see. Maybe this was from a long time ago. Maybe it's fresh. Maybe there's a whole species they haven't encountered yet. I that excites me about possibilities as opposed to me just being disappointed that I didn't get an answer about it, you know?
Yeah, because like the thing of it is that it's not really like leaving a plot thread dangling, right? Because it was introducing this thing like, all right, have you seen the movie version of The Mist?
I have not seen The Mist, no.
All right. Well, there is a scene near the end of the movie that I don't want to spoil because it's like a big deal in the context of the movie. But like basically the gist of it is throughout the entire movie, they're getting attacked by these weird extra dimensional monsters that are coming out of this mist to attack them. And then at the end of the movie, this something happens where it basically makes them realize, oh man, there's so much more at play here, and everything is so much bigger, like in scope, if not necessarily in size. There's so much more going on here.
Yeah.
And so like when this happened in this movie, I was watching this scene and I was like, oh, you know, there's something that's shedding a skin that we don't actually see at any point in the movie.
Yeah.
Like I didn't go, I want to see that monster. I just went, oh, there's more monsters here than they're showing us.
Right. Yeah.
It's fine.
It's fine. Yeah. But I don't miss it from the movie either, you know?
Yeah. Same. It doesn't really do anything at the end of the day.
Sure. So the next scene we see is everyone back on the ship after the initial expedition, after, you know, they've gotten back through the storm and Shaw has rescued the head, and she's just talking to everybody about they have proof now that they're not alone in the universe, and they haven't dissected the head yet, right?
They have not. This is pre-head explosion.
And we get some nice Captain Janik moments where he's like, next time leave the head behind or whatever, like, you're crazy, why'd you go after that, etc. Just sort of being, you know, not being a dick about it, right? Because the real dick in this scene is Holloway. It's
Holloway.
Already drinking, already being just a huge asshole.
Yeah, he's over in the corner, pounding them back, glaring at everyone while they're trying to celebrate. It's like, bruh.
He's mad that they're 2,000 years late to meeting the engineers, and he doesn't understand why Shaw is so excited. And she's like, because this proves we're not alone. And he's like, but they're all dead. We are alone. Just being a real dick, you know?
Yeah, real fucking dick.
He sucks, and I'm glad this scene was cut.
Same.
And I'm sure that the commentary was like, this, yeah, Holloway sucks, and I'm glad we reshot a lot of his scenes and cut these, you know?
Well, the commentary actually didn't really say much of note. They said that the primary reason they cut this scene is because they changed the next scene.
Yeah.
Like not the next scene in the movie, but like the next scene we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
They changed that. And then after they changed that, they were like, uh-oh. And so they had to go back and cut this scene because then it wouldn't make any more sense.
Right.
The only other thing of note they mentioned in the commentary is maybe they said this in the scene and I just didn't notice during when the scene was happening. But like, you know, part of Shaw's toast is how she's like, you know, telling the story that she heard when she was in Africa about this like creation myth or whatever.
Yeah.
And in the scene, I thought she just said, while I was in Africa, I heard this story.
Yes.
But in the commentary, they specifically note that her mother was the one that told her that story.
Oh,
and I'm like, I don't remember her saying that in the actual scene, though.
And that story was a story about how the sun created people because the sun was tired of being alone.
Yeah.
And that's a nice allusion to her thinking of somebody created us. She's making the illusion the engineers created us because they were tired of being alone, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly that's not the case, but that was her thinking at the time, certainly. Up until the end of the movie, really.
At least, like, metaphorically, that's the reason why, if not actually,
Yes, totally. But let's talk about that next scene, because this is the first fully alternate scene, right? Where
this is an entirely different scene that got replaced wholesale by completely new everything in the same location.
It's an alternate version of Shaw in her quarters after the engineer head pops, when she's eating and reviewing the footage, the weird footage of the black box footage, I guess, from the Prometheus or from the engineer ship. Right
before he infects her via sex.
Yes. And Holloway comes in and he is fucking plastered. So he's been drinking by himself, drinking with David. He's been infected but doesn't know it yet,
Yeah.
He just comes in as just a total raging alcoholic monster in this scene.
In my note, I specifically described him as a, quote, belligerent dick, is how I phrased it.
Yes.
Sorry, even more of a belligerent dick. Sorry.
He says some interesting stuff about the video where he's like, oh, Shaw is watching the video.
Yeah.
She says some interesting stuff about the video where she notices, because Holloway's like, he's watching the video. He's like, they're all running from something. Why doesn't the video show us what's chasing it? And Shaw is like, look, I saw the face on that head that we had in the lab, and he knew he was going to die. And in this footage, it seems clear he knew he was going to die. I think that there was an outbreak, and that's what they were running from. That's why we don't see anything they're running from on this video footage, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Until you think about the fact that they were all fucking in there with their helmets off.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to go back the next day with their fucking helmets off. Like, if she has knowledge that a suspicion that there might be some kind of toxin or pathogen in the air, they should be taking better precautions the next day for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a side note about just one of the things I think is really dumb about that movie, and something that fucking Holloway started by taking his helmet off in the first place. But
yeah, that's all his fault.
It really is. But he's being an asshole. This is when he's talking about being 2,000 years late, right? They keep hammering that 2,000 years thing in this more so than they did in the actual movie.
And he's like ranting and raving about how like he can't fucking believe that like humans only exist because somebody else was tinkering around as like a science experiment.
Right.
He calls Earth a petri dish at one point.
Yep.
He's just pissed off because all the engineers are dead and they created humans for no reason other than seemingly just to see if they could, I guess.
Yeah. So he's having an existential crisis, but that's no excuse for like,
correct.
Because he says some like terrible shit to Shaw too about her parents and everything.
Yeah, it's like I saw the scene happening and it still felt kind of a stretch how they kind of tried to like wiggle the dialogue to get him to say these things. And he's like, kind of roasting her a little for like believing in God and being religious. And then he starts like, confronting her about like, do you want to go and meet your creator to like, ask them about why your mother and father are dead and all of these other things. And then she slaps him.
Slaps the shit out of him.
Yeah, slaps the shit out of him. And then he like recoils back and then she slaps him again.
Good. Fucking keep hitting him. But no, so he just like starts like, I'm sorry. And it's like very weirdly physical, like domestic violence.
Yeah, like,
and then they start.
Yeah, and then they start making out. She slaps him. Out. And then he gets all uppity and upset and about it. And then she slaps him again. And then he immediately, like a switch, goes from angry to like sorrowful, and he like grabs her and scoops her up, and you can see her trying to like push away from him.
Sure.
And so he pulls her in closer and starts telling her how sorry she is and tries to kiss her, and she pulls away. So he pulls her back in even closer. And I'm like, bro, what the hell are you doing?
But they end up fucking.
Yeah, they quote, as my notes say, they end up having angry sex.
It is clearly angry sex. It does seem to be consensual. This wasn't like, correct. The scene could have been worse is what I'm saying, but it's still not great. And I don't like this version of the scene. I think even as kind of weirdly forced her dialogue in the theatrical cut about him being upset about creating life and her having the moment where she's like, but I can't create life. What does that say about me? And the way they had to kind of shoehorn that in, you know?
Which that's also an important thing to know in this version of the scene.
Yeah.
She doesn't say that.
Right.
So in this version in that version of the movie, she isn't infertile, I guess.
Right. So I wonder if that must have changed the dialogue later when David tells her she's pregnant and she's like, well, I can't be. I guess actually in that scene, it's never, because she says it's impossible for me to be. She's saying I can't be. It's only been a day. Right. So
yeah,
a little weird, maybe a goof there, but I'm glad that this alternate scene was left on the cutting room floor, honestly.
The only other thing of note that the commentary mentioned about this scene is that the whole reason they changed it, because like in the little menu, they say that this scene was made, or like this change was made like way late in the process. Yeah. Like it was going to be this scene in the movie for like months and months and months. And then really, really close to the end, they decided to go back through and change this like months later. They filmed the new version of the scene and replaced it with this.
Right.
Because the editor had said that they thought, or they had decided rather, that the movie had not spent enough time showing the two of them just like together as a couple, and like the movie didn't have it really very many scenes of them just like being like tender and romantic and close with each other.
Right.
And so since by that point, they already knew how he was going to die and the fact that he was going to die.
Yeah.
So they went back and changed this scene into something more tender and kind between the two of them.
Sure.
So that that way it would have more of like an emotional impact to the viewer when he gets killed later on in the movie.
Okay. That all kind of makes sense, I guess.
I mean, he still sucks even in the final credit or in the final cut. But if this had been in there, he would have sucked even more. So I guess technically it did work.
Sure.
So,
yeah. So the next scene in this hat trick of Holloway bullshit is Holloway being kind of hung over in the morning. It's basically just an extended version of the next morning after he and Shaw have gotten busy, where he's
very slightly extended. There's like
splashing water on his face.
10 seconds maybe.
Yeah, it's really nothing. He's splashing water on his face. He sees the little squiggle in his eye, and Shaw wakes up and she's checking on him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just hungover." It just made me think that like him being hungover is a pretty good cover for him sort of not realizing that he's feeling sick, right, from the infection. It just kind of adds some sort of believability that he would still be like, "No, I'm good to go explore this alien wasteland. I just need like a Gatorade and I'm good to go,"
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. But
the only thing this scene really adds is like when Yannick hits Shaw up on the comms, because they're like going to go investigate or whatever after she gets dressed. But before she leaves, she basically just comes over to be like, "Hey, Charlie, you okay?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. And she's like, "Yeah, sure?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I promise I'm okay." And she's like, "All right," and then leaves. And that's like the only thing this scene has in it.
Yeah, nothing. Just nothing. Just nothing.
Nothing.
Man, there's just a long string of Holloway there. No shade to the actor whose name I can't pull right now. He did a great job and I like him.
Logan Marshall Green.
No shade to him. The character was just
bad.
Like I wasn't a big fan of the way the character played out in the theatrical movie, and I would have hated him even more if this had been the version, right? So
this makes him look way worse than he did in the final cut. That's true.
Yeah. We get a small scene now with David, when David was exploring the facility kind of on his own, where we see that he's in communication with Vickers and he's looking for his objective, and she's asking him about it. Not a lot there.
She tells him to come back, and then when he says he will, but he's obviously lying, right. He then confirms to her that he's located his objective.
Right.
That's it. That's all that happens.
My note says, eh.
Yeah. Mine has the one sentence explain what's going on, and then I literally wrote, man, whatever, shrug after it. The commentary for that.
Yeah.
Because that scene shows that Vickers knew what David was planning, and they ultimately decided they wanted it to be a surprise to everyone except David and Wayland. That's why the scene got cut.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's it, though. That was all I had. Go on.
That's it. The next scene, though, with
it's great.
Janek talking to Vickers. This is after Vickers has roasted Holloway like a marshmallow. Mm-hmm. She's just sitting in her quarters, right? Just like wrapped in a blanket and very clearly like in some weird kind of shock. Well, not a weird kind of shock. Yeah. The kind of shock I think it would be understandable for you to have after you've had to flamethrower a guy on a rock in space because you're worried about a contagious outbreak, because somebody should be fucking worried about it.
And she's apparently the only one that is. Something
else we will talk about in Alien Covenant.
Yeah.
Janet comes in. He knocks on their door and he's got like a mug of something, and she's like, I don't want coffee. And he's like, good thing it's rum then, right? It's a nice touch. Because again.
And then that's because of that is why she lets it.
Now, my first note on this scene is I would watch a whole movie of Idris Elba and Charlize Theron sitting in a room talking.
Same. This scene was so good.
Yes. And the movie needed more Janek anyway.
Agreed.
He's telling her a story about before he was kind of independent. He was in the military, and he was like sort of flying. He was flying for the military, and he tells a story about one rescue mission he was on, where like they were constantly flying to this place for drop-offs or whatever, and he would fly past this building that was like no windows, just steel construction, fenced in and everything, and they just knew some shady shit was going on in there. Something happened, there was an explosion or something, right? And they had to evacuate this facility, and they evacuated it pretty much everybody except the scientists working in this building, who were just like banging to escape, but their orders were not to do that.
Blow it up with them inside, yeah.
And his commander had this button and was saying a prayer, and when they were 6 clicks out, he hit the button and blew up the facility. And Janet kind of realized that the fences and all of that stuff wasn't to keep people out of that structure. It was to keep whatever was in that structure in, you know.
And it's very clearly intended to like parallel what they believe happened to the engineers, you know.
Yes, totally. She's like, why are you telling me the story? And he says, because you killed a man today, and that's, you know, that's really
hard
awful
to deal with, or whatever it is he says. Yeah.
She brushes it off by saying, I burnt my hand. Like, that's why she's in this mood. Like, clearly that's not true, right? She's just trying to be tough.
Yeah, she's closing herself off again after briefly letting herself be vulnerable around him.
Yeah. Couple things about this before I move on in the scene. Yeah, Janek does say that he thinks that same thing is what happened to the engineers. He says those engineers made something they shouldn't have, and they spilled it. Like, that's
someone spilt something is the specific line he says.
Yeah, Janek is just way ahead of the curve on everything, right? This is kind of, would this maybe be an alternate version of the scene where he's talking to Shaw and just giving her all of that exposition?
Probably, and I think I like this version of it better, honestly.
I do too. Also, the idea of him working for the military, and there were all of these, like some structure he's clearly alluding to, where there was an outbreak, Do you think that ties into the Wayland, like genetic in his Wayland's predecessor, like genetic experiments that they were working on? Do you think this could go that far back?
I mean, it very well could. I mean, they don't say anything that like explicitly would give us a reason to connect it together. No. But that's the kind of like through line that, you know, this franchise likes to do. So possibly.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. I mean, once you told me about that in the Wayland files, his little journal entry on that idea, I made that connection. I was like, I wonder if that was like one of the facilities.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe could have been.
Scene. Great scene. Should have been in the fucking movie.
Oh, great scene. I loved it. It was like how you said it was meant to maybe parallel the one he had with Shaw. It's like this version, like if those two scenes were meant to be like, you know, the alternate of each other, I like this version better. I'll be honest.
Oh yeah. And even if it's just a companion to it, like you could have them both in, right? Strong performances by two, like absolutely phenomenal actors. The strong point of this movie, like atmospherically, is very strong, and the casting and acting, like we touched on last week or last episode, is very, very strong also.
Yeah, it's great too. Like he has a good bit of like physical acting there where it's like while he's giving the speech, he's just like wandering around her room, like picking books up off the shelf, open them to a random page, flip through a couple other pages, put the book back, go over, tap a couple of notes out on the piano. It's just, it's great. I'm
not kidding. I would watch 90 minutes of that. Like just two absolute fucking pros, you know?
The commentary mentioned that the reason this was cut was for pacing issues. This was another scene that he really liked and wished he had kept in the movie.
Yeah.
But like this is right after like that big fight with the flamethrower and all that. And then like this point in the movie, like once that happens, that's when the movie starts like ramping up. Yeah. And he was worried that for a scene this long, it would just slow the pace of the movie down too much.
Yeah.
And also one other little note is that he very casually and offhandedly mentioned that the engineer ship, like that class of ship, it's referred to as a juggernaut.
A juggernaut. I have heard that before. Yeah.
Yep. So that's fun.
I mean, I'm no filmmaker, obviously. I kind of disagree. I think after a big dramatic moment, like Holloway being torched, you know, I think that you could use a moment. I'd like to see a moment of reflection on something after something like that in a movie. You know,
like, you know, you have a moment to breathe. You have a moment to like, you know, this character literally just fucking murdered someone by lighting them on fire. It would be nice to know, like, you know, see a bit of like, you know, human trepidation and reflection in her eyes, on her face.
Yeah.
Like, you know, actually see her as a real human person like she is.
Yes.
I think this scene should have been in the movie, and I think the movie would have been better if it had stayed in.
There is one little moment at the end of it where she gets the transmission. Something about Wayland waking up, you know, and...
Well, they say he, like David asks, is he waking up or has he woken up or something like that?
Right.
And she's like, you know, he's about to or whatever. And Yannick's like, who's he? What the hell are you guys talking about? And like, they all just ignore him and brush him off. And he never does get the answer to that question.
No, he doesn't. So then that little scene, I mean, if they were trying to keep the Wayland reveal, make it a surprise for everybody, including Vickers, then they could have just cut that last little bit and still left the scene in, you know? I'm just saying. I also think that the idea of keeping everybody in the dark except for David about Wayland is kind of silly.
Yeah.
I don't really think it added anything. I mean, because there was a previous scene that was actually in the movie where David had been talking to Wayland and she was like, what did he say? And he said, try harder, or whatever the scene was. So she was aware. I don't know, man. I'm not following. I'm not following.
Yeah, I don't know what his thinking was. Like that didn't really, I couldn't find the through line there when he was talking about it either, but I was just like, all right, man, whatever. I'll just take your word for it.
Yeah. Speaking of Vickers, though, the next scene where she is confronting Wayland on the ship and just like really fucking roasting him.
Oh yeah. She's really getting into him. She's burning him hard on that one.
Yeah, things I liked about that scene, I liked seeing them strapping all of like the mechanical like stabilizers and stuff onto Waylon so he can walk, because
he's like almost in a suit of powered armor. He's like
right.
in sort of an exoskeleton, which, shades of Aliens, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. Also, Dark Knight Rises.
Also, Dark Knight Rises. Yes.
And I like the twist in that scene that he was surprised that Vickers was on the ship.
It's weird. It's like the dialogue kind of implied that she came despite his insistence rather than because of it. Like right. He wanted her to stay and she's she insisted on coming. Like in the last episode, we thought it was the other way around, that she's only there because he made her. Right. But no, he didn't want her to be here.
Yeah. She makes some comment about how she wasn't going to be sitting in boardrooms arguing about who has control while this was going on and stuff. And it was interesting. And she sticks him with that line. She calls him like a scared, weak old man, which is very true, right?
Extremely, yes.
Like he's afraid. He's been afraid this whole time. That's driven all of this shit he's done. No matter how in control he thinks he is, he's just a sad, scared dude.
I mean, that's why he wants to become immortal. He's afraid of dying. I mean, a lot of people are, but you know what I mean.
And she says that line like, a king has his reign and then he dies. Like that's the cycle.
That's the natural order of things.
Good lines. Good Vickers.
Good, yeah. I liked it too.
Yeah. I would have liked to see that in the film as well.
Agreed.
So now we get an alternate version of Fifield's attack when he comes back all infected and he's all crouched down in that weird crab position outside the ship. It's the same scene, but the change is in Fifield himself and the way he's mutated. He's like got a longer head. His arms are quite a bit longer. He almost looks, he very clearly looks a lot closer to the Xenomorph as opposed to just how he looked with like this weird zombie in the actual movie.
Yeah, like his head has kind of like an elongated point in the back. Yes. And like his facial features are kind of like melting down to become like a sheen over his face.
Yes.
And his skin is getting this weird gray pallor to it. And like you said, his limbs are longer. And it's like he looks halfway between a human and a xenomorph.
Yeah, more so than the thing at the end of Alien Resurrection. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, even when he's jumping around inside the cargo bay, like he's moving like a quadrupedal monster as opposed to a human. I don't know if I prefer it or not. Part of me prefers it because it makes the mutation a little bit more. It bridges the gap a little bit more between the xenomorph and just the regular infection. It feels a little closer to Alien. I'm still don't know that I agree with the biological aspect of it all in the way that I think of and appreciate the Xenomorph. But I don't know, man. I'm guessing this is the one that the VFX guy did the commentary on. Is that correct?
That is correct. This is the only one he was doing the commentary for. And I'll tell you right now, the commentary doesn't really have anything of note or meaning that expanded your understanding of the scene. However, there was one thing that did. Once again, that little menu pops up when you cursor on the video, but before you play it.
Yeah.
It talks about how this scene was filmed not with the intention of it actually being used in the movie.
Oh,
it was only filmed and the prosthetics were there to serve as a reference so that he could be entirely replaced by CG during post-production of the movie.
Huh.
And then Ridley Scott looked at the footage and looked at the prosthetics and was like, I'm just going to use this. And so they were like, okay. So that's why he's like that in the final cut of the movie.
Okay. So that's why we got the theatrical version.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think that for the scene, I like this version better for that isolated scene. The movement just seems a little bit more alien and kind of closer. Like if you're going to tease us an alien movie without the alien, that is a better tease than zombie guy suddenly indestructible,
Yeah.
But I don't know that I really like it in the scheme of the entire franchise. Like I'm not sure that I would really like how a alien-like human really fits in to the grand, to the grand scheme of everything.
Like you said, in a vacuum, I think I like this version of the scene better than the one in the theatrical cut.
Yeah.
But in the context of if they had replaced that version of it with this one, I think the one they ended up using is the better choice. Because also going back to our previous episode about the actual movie, this movie is kind of in that like weird gray area of, I believe my phrasing of it was, it is simultaneously both too much and not enough of an alien movie or something like that.
Yes.
And it's like, a lot of the stuff that they've been going through and cutting, like, the CG, the VFX on this scene, or like the skin that they found earlier, a lot of this stuff, it's like, it's literally direct references to a Xenomorph or maybe the first movie. And they went through and cut a lot of that stuff out. And it's like, I believe it was you that said, if you're not going to have actual Xenomorphs in this movie, just make it completely something different altogether.
I would have preferred that. Yeah.
And that's ultimately why I'm glad they ended up going with the version of this scene that they did for the final movie, because it's like, don't keep on teasing me with things that are 70% of the way towards a Xenomorph and then never give me one. Either do it or don't.
Yeah. So they keep pulling out stuff that was references to the Xenomorph, they're pulling out that alien DNA, so to speak. But I guess in the theatrical cut for me, they didn't pull out enough of it. They left just enough of it in to frustrate me.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would have liked it more if they had added more in, left all of those things in, or just stripped all of the rest of it out. I think ultimately I probably would have preferred it all stripped out. I still think the Milburn finding the specimen, that could have stayed personally. But that was just like a big roly-poly,
Like the two scenes so far that we've come across that we've both really liked, I wished were in the movie.
Yeah.
But like both of those scenes don't really have any real explicit alien references to them. All of the cut scenes that are explicit alien references, ultimately, I'm probably glad they cut them,
Yeah, sure. And unless having them in would have sort of guided the sequel in a different direction than they ended up going. I'm who's to say?
Man, that would have been something, wouldn't it? Ooh.
Yeah. Anyway, after this, after that scene, we get we get the scene where the engineer speaks, right? It's the alternate version of the engineer waking up from the hypersleep pod and facing David and
Wayland
and Shaw and Ford, I think is her name. And
I believe so. And there's one other guy that I don't think they ever named him.
One of the mercenaries that was hired for security. And it's just a David in the theatrical cut. David says some things to the engineer, and then the engineer just attacks, right? And in this, they have a little bit of back and forth.
Like looks at him for a second, processes what he said, and then like strokes David's hair, and then just rips his head off and starts attacking him.
Yeah. So one of the things the engineer says in this, as translated by David, is that the engineer wants to know why the humans are here. And then Wayland has David say whatever it is he wanted him to say, like, I forget the actual line, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't remember it either.
But what David tells him instead is, I told him you wanted to live forever, and he now asks you why. That's just the translations of the engineer's line. Beyond that, the scene plays out exactly the same. I liked seeing the engineer talk. I think having a little bit more context is interesting. I could probably take it or leave it, thinking about it more now,
Yeah.
I think it's fine. I remember this being released ahead of time to promote the DVD. Like the engineer speaks deleted scene was like a big thing that I think I read about it on like Gamma Squad, an old Uproxx blog, like that's probably where I first saw this scene. I like the idea.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
I like the idea also that David kind of went off a book and wasn't directly saying what Wayland told him to, and just kind of outed Wayland as like, I told the engineer you want to live forever. That's not what Wayland wanted him to say,
Yeah, that's not what he asked him to say exactly. Right. He's adapting, not translating. guess.
Sure. And I also like the stuff that Waylon was saying in the same scene about how he made David in his own image. I'm a creator like you. We're both gods, when he's saying this stuff to the engineer. Again,
yeah,
just
like going back to his TED Talk video, he once again hits upon the idea of like his hubris and how he thinks he is a god and how he's superior to other people.
Sure.
Like that keeps on being a thread, a button that this character arc hits over and over and over again.
Yeah. Good. I mean, good stuff there. I think, yeah, I would have been fine with this being in the film. We didn't necessarily need it. I think maybe there's a stronger statement. Like if there had been a mix where Wayland is saying those things to the engineer, and then the engineer just like rips the head off of David, and then I love when he beats David with it. It's so funny.
He rips David's heads off, knocks over the body, and then uses David's head, and that's what he clubs Wayland to death with.
It's a good scene any way you slice it.
The commentary didn't really notice anything of note or use. Like the only thing they mentioned is that the reason that stuff was cut was because by this point in the movie, they had decided that the engineers weren't going to talk. And so, that was along with the opening scene of the movie. This was the reason why that stuff got cut. So.
Sure. I think there's a version in between this one and the theatrical cut where you still don't have to have the engineer talk, but it's kind of, you present what Wayland is saying from this, and the engineer reacting to that is just like, how dare you compare yourself to me, you sad old man. Even your daughter hates you, Anyway, yeah, I could take it or leave it, I guess.
Yeah, same.
But this final battle scene where Shaw, after the ship has crashed, after I keep saying Janik. It's Yannick. Is that the correct pronunciation?
It's Yannick. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going back and changing it, but I'll acknowledge it here so you all can stop writing your emails. After Yannick has crashed the Prometheus into the Covenant ship, Why do I keep doing that? Into the engineer ship. You
did that in the last episode too.
Into the Juggernaut, and has I'm just getting everything fucking wrong, dude. Jesus. and Shaw has made it to the life pod.
And she's packing up some stuff, tossing like protein bars and drinks and stuff into a backpack.
Yeah, we get a short version of this. Basically, the way this plays out in the theatrical cut is she gets the call from David that the engineer is coming after her. He's immediately busting through those doors. There's this very small tussle, and then the trilobite or whatever it's called gets loose, right?
The trilobite, and by when you say small tussle, what you mean is she sees the engineer and then runs away, and then the engineer runs up to her and picks her up and throws her against a wall, and then she hits a button to open the door, and the trilobite attacks the engineer. That is that's the entirety of their fight in the theater.
But this alternate scene, this is another one I would have loved to see in the actual
hard agree. Hardest possible agree. I wish this was in the movie.
With the engineer he's just quietly, sort of silently moving through this pod. She's trying to hide from him. She's got an axe, to fight him. I just really like this was like the tense. This is what the movie for me should have been. If we're gonna position the engineers as the alien threat versus the Xenomorph, this scene of the engineer stalking her and her trying to fight against it and everything, just an excellent scene. And I'm really upset that this one got cut. Like that would have, you could remove all the other fucking alien DNA from this thing and just have the movie be this. And this would shoot up in my estimation significantly.
Yeah,
in the series. Like, yeah, man, I don't know. The way he was like moving and everything, just kind of silently. And versus the Xenomorph, it's this towering like Adonis of a humanoid, clearly like 3 feet taller than her and just nothing but muscle.
And there's so many little moments, like little individual spots in this scene that I like. First off, we were discussing last episode about how when we were discussing the scene, we even talked about how we wished, like you even said, why doesn't she use that axe against him? She doesn't even need to kill him. She can just like draw blood and make him realize, and then I made the comparison to the end of 300. Turns out this scene is exactly what we were looking for.
She draws blood with the axe in this. Yeah, man. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a couple other little individual notes I like when he walks into the main room, when she's hiding behind the bar and he sees that glitching out video of the little girl playing violin and he like reaches out towards it and his fingers start like mimicking the movement of the girls on the video.
Yeah.
I thought was really cool.
Such a cool scene.
There's one other also little shot like right before that, like when he opens the door, which I found funny because it's like when the door opens, there's a shot of when the door is sliding open, he's like crouched down and then sees that the door is open and then just stands up and strolls right through, which I don't know if that was necessarily supposed to represent anything thematically. I just thought it looked really cool.
I think it was just like an allusion to like when the Terminators arrive in the Terminator movies.
That's what I thought. I thought of the Terminator as well.
Yeah. It's that. So picture it. If you're not going to watch this scene, it's that pose, you know.
It's literally like shot from the side. He's like crouched down and then just unfolds like a Naboo robot from Star Wars Episode 1.
Yeah, it was cool, and it was almost like he just couldn't figure out how to use the technology right away because it's very clearly different from how, like, is he like searching on the ground for the door opening flute or something?
Probably something like that.
But no, good. Yeah, just a good scene. Way better than
there's one little other tiny moment during that part that I liked. Like after he opens the door, when he walks in through the middle of the room and he like bumps into the chandelier a little bit, and then he just like reaches out and like strokes one of the ropes on the chandelier, like admiring its beauty. And then immediately after that, there's like a close up of the chandelier, as if we're very briefly seeing the chandelier from the POV of the engineer. And I just thought that was a really cool touch that made me go, "Oh man, that just looks so neat."
I also love Shaw shooting herself up with the painkiller like through her spacesuit because she's been through a lot. She just had surgery like an hour ago, you know. And then like the way that she gets busted, she's hiding behind the bar. Oh, I also love she walks in and she just immediately like starts drinking the vodka.
Yeah, grabs vodka and just drinks it right out of the bottle. Yeah,
this first, you know. I mean, at that point she's got to deal with the trilobite, but she primarily thinks she's safe, right? Because she's got to the lifeboat, at least safe for a moment. But no. But then when she's hiding behind the bar from the engineer, and it's David on the radio that gives away her position, I was like, which I thought was also a
nice touch because, like, earlier on when David was like, "Hey, Shaw, the engineer's on your way," she never responded to that.
Right.
So David, like, genuinely didn't even know if she got the message. So it's not like some weird narrative convenience that's why he cuts in right there. Like, he cuts in there because she never got back to him and he was concerned, you know?
I mean, that, or maybe he was like, sinisterly like trying to give away her position. Who knows? I mean, clearly he is, but clearly he is banking on needing her assistance, you know? Probably more the reason he warned her was for self-preservation as opposed to like genuine concern.
I mean, otherwise he was just going to be sitting there as a head.
Sure, right. Nobody wants that. But I love the scene when he like sees her behind the bar and he's just like towering over her, and we kind of have that high shot looking down, and you can just like see like the size disparity between the two of them.
Yeah. And she's like cowering for a moment, and then after they lock eyes for a second or two, she just like stands up to get ready for him, and she's like, "You know what? I'm done. Fuck this guy.
What else am I gonna do?" Right? Like, I'm going down swinging. Yeah, man. Solid scene.
Very solid. Again, one of the like, just like two of the previous scenes, I wish it was this version of it that was in the movie. The commentary though does point out some other stuff. First off, you may have noticed that the engineer in this scene, the last engineer, his face wasn't burned in this scene.
Okay.
And the reason why it wasn't was because they filmed this scene. Then later on, they did a reshoot, like the scene where the engineer got burned. That was a reshoot scene, and it was shot after this one.
Okay.
That's why in this scene, the engineer's face isn't two-faced like that.
Right.
And the other thing of note is that the reason the editor and Ridley cut it out of the movie was this might have even been something we touched on in the previous episode. I don't remember. But the reason they cut it out was because they felt that it wasn't believable that someone of Shaw's size and stature could believably like bite off one of these things.
I think that's bullshit. I mean,
yeah, same. I mean, I understand what they're saying, but like, here's the thing.
Right.
This is what we want to see. You know, this is what we as viewers, we want to see a direct confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist.
Yes.
And that's what this was.
And let's be clear, the engineer's ship just crashed and he survived it. It's absolutely believable he'd be a little banged up from that, even if he's not showing signs of pain. We don't know how their biology really works. They don't seem to really show any signs of pain until their bodies are dissolving from the pathogen. And even then, it doesn't seem particularly extreme. Like,
exactly.
He just,
like the other thing of it is that this whole movie is a whole episode of reference to the first Alien movie,
right? In
which at the end of the movie, a single individual woman, kicks the giant predator alien's ass and kills it, you know?
Oh, yeah. I know, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, if they were going to go out of their way to reference the first movie as much as they do here, they could have also emulated that, but they didn't. And now that I saw the version of the scene where they did, I wish they had kept that in.
I also understand that Shaw has been through a hell of a lot, like surgery and all of that kind of stuff. But we also saw her just like take a big drink of vodka and shoot herself up with some extremely strong painkillers. I'm sure that's like, you know, in Max Payne when you take the painkillers or whatever, and like suddenly you're fucking fine. Like, I don't know, man.
This is immediately after a scene where, you know, for a good minute or two on screen, probably longer in the canon of the movie, she was running through a field, escaping from a spaceship trying to crush her.
She's clearly she's capable. She's a survivor, you know?
Yeah, she's like clearly in enough of a physical, like, good shape to be able to at least take one or two hits from this thing, you know?
Right. Yeah. If that's where the edits could have been made, is the length of the actual altercation, but the stalking, you know, the engineer in the pod checking everything out, kind of stalking her and her trying to hide, that should have stayed in no matter what, I think.
Agreed.
And I don't think that the cuts they did to get the theatrical version were, you know, we still see all of those. We see him kind of barging his way through the doors that are trying to close and stuff, but that's his entrance as opposed to him pursuing Shaw. Yeah. And, you know, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Like you said, I like this version of the scene better. So
yeah. The last thing we get is kind of an alternate version of Elizabeth finding David, right? She asks him some alternate questions, right?
Again, they say that, like, with the opening scene of the movie, they describe this as also an alternate ending, but it's only an alternate ending in the way the alternate opening is alternate, in that there's, like, you know, they changed like 10% of it. Sure. It's still pretty much basically the exact same thing that we've already seen, with like 2 lines of dialogue added.
Yeah, and the cuts got to only be because they removed the engineers talking in this, where she asks David what the engineer said and where it came from, and David translates it. He says it loosely translates to paradise, like that's where they came from, right? Paradise. So some kind of Garden of Eden allusion, I'm sure, right?
And she insists that she wants to go there when she's like, you know, oh, I don't want to go back to Earth. There's nothing but death here. I want to go to paradise. I want to see what they saw, or whatever it is.
Right. And then she very angrily stuffs David's head in the duffel bag. And he's like,
I have that note too. It literally says she also puts his head into the bag a lot more angrily. I literally also have that.
And she does it right there on the platform, like in the command center, the cockpit of the engineer ship, not as they're escaping like she does in the final cut. But it still cuts to that scene where his head is unbagged as she's lowering the body down.
That is because in the like menu for the scenes, it mentions that they edited in some of the shots from the final cut to just like, show the continuity of like where it appears in the movie, and like just to like give you some reference point for when it would happen in the movie. Right. That's why that scene is there.
Okay. So. Gotcha. And that's it. That is it for all the extended and deleted scenes that they.
Yep, that's all of them
that they put out for Prometheus. I think we walked away with that thinking, what the scene with Milburn finding the specimen. I would have liked to see that in the movie. The Yannick, pardon me, and Vickers scene absolutely should have been in the movie. And the final battle with the engineer and Shaw definitely should have.
Yep, those are, for the record, scene 47, our first alien. Scene 105, Yannick fills Vickers in. And then scene 140, final battle. All of the rest of the stuff that we mentioned, we either didn't like or could take it or leave it. But those three, I'm giving the thumbs up to. I wish those were actually in the movie.
Yeah, and if they ever do like an extended cut, a special edition, like they'd have done with other movies in the series, those are the scenes I'd want to see added back in specifically.
Same.
For sure. Man, that's a lot to go through, dude.
Yeah, there's a whole lot.
Yeah. I think we should get out of here. I think we should hop into our engineer ship and sail off to paradise.
It's the Juggernaut. We just talked about this.
Sorry. I'll get the names right eventually. Next time, I think we're going to visit a comic book that at one point was considered a sequel to this movie, but publishers have changed and another movie has been made since then. So who knows?
Yeah.
But I think that we should dive into the Prometheus chapter of the Fire and Stone comic book series from Dark Horse Comics. What do you think?
I think that sounds great. It is, I believe it's 4 issues.
4 issues.
And I believe the way the Fire and Stone miniseries works is that there is a Prometheus, an alien, a predator, and an alien versus predator like chapter. Yes. And each one is 4 issues long. I believe the Prometheus chapter is part 1 of that series, I believe.
Yes, the Prometheus chapters is part 1. And it is a self-contained story. I mean, obviously the 3 or the 4 different books all overlap in events and stuff like that. But the Prometheus one is a standalone story. They're all each a standalone story that still, have crossover content, whatever. So I'm just
interested. There is also actually there's another part of the Fire and Stone story after you get through all 4 of those parts. Yes. There is a one-shot epilogue, and the reason I'm mentioning that epilogue is because it's actually branded as a Prometheus comic. Right. Its name is Prometheus Fire and Stone Omega, I believe.
Yes.
And even though that is a Prometheus comic that is part of Fire and Stone, we're not going to be talking about that in the next episode because that's the end of the arc and this is the beginning. And we don't want to, skip over the stuff in between. So we'll talk about all that stuff and get to the Omega issue in a later episode.
Yeah, since these are self-contained miniseries, at least at the beginning here, we can kind of cover them one bit at a time as they relate to other stuff, thematically, other things that we're going to cover in the series. Like, I'm certainly not interested in jumping into a Predator comic this early on in the podcast.
Same.
So yeah, Prometheus Fire and Stone issues 1 through 4. We're going to talk about that on the next episode. After that, we're going to start jumping into the Alien Covenant era.
Yeah, like that section of the franchise. Yeah.
Yeah. But for now, I know I said that we were going to climb into an engineer juggernaut, but what are we going to do? We can't park this USCSS podcast vessel. We better stay on board here. Oh boy. Clunky.
We're still getting used to it. It's all right.
All right, Kenny. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to tell you why you're wrong about the way to pronounce Captain Yannick's name?
You can find me on Twitter. My handle is at CYHOBBEZ.
And you can find me on Twitter at Final Neal. Follow my retro gaming Instagram account at Final Neal Retro. Check out my other podcast, MK Podquest. It's in your podcast app. or at mkpodquest.com. It's all about Mortal Kombat movies, TV shows, comic books, etc. Anything that is not a video game that's in the world of Mortal Kombat for the most part. You can follow the show on Twitter at Crew Expendapod. That's right, Crew Expendapod.
It's like expendable, but replace the last 3 letters with POD.
And if you are the person out there with the unused Crew Expendable handle, DM us at Crew Expendapod, and we will give you upwards of $7 for your username.
You heard it here first.
That's upwards. That's at the top end.
Correct. At maximum.
Yeah. Subscribe to the show in your podcast apps. Subscribe on Good Pods. You can follow me on Good Pods at Final Neal. Find the show there. Give us good reviews. Tell your friends. Tell all your alien friends to listen to our show. It's going to go on forever because there are just a million alien things to talk about.
It never stops.
We will be back next week to talk Prometheus Fire and Stone issues 1 through 4. Until then, stay frosty.